What's a family secret you didn't get told until you were older that made things finally make sense? That my sister, she was 16 when I was born and kicked out, is my mother. Her mother, my grandma, raised me as her daughter. It doesn't end there. I was a product of abuse from a family friend. To this day I don't know who my real dad is. My grandma was in her 40s when she had me, and my sister was sent to a boarding school when she was pregnant with me. My sister has no idea that I know. My uncle came to visit us when I was little, and before he came, mum sat me down and told me not to be alone with my uncle, and that if he made me feel uncomfortable to let her know. Found out last year that when my mum was 9, she was raped by my uncle. Edit, accidentally wrote her uncle instead of my uncle in the last sentence. Something felt strange about my grandfather's funeral, just the way they were emphasizing his place in heaven. Later found out that he shot himself in the heart with a 357. Same side of the family also had seemingly random people show up at family gatherings throughout my life that ended up being illegitimate children of my grandma. I just started gaining uncles and cousins. Confused the shit out of me as a child. Grandpa is a pedo with a track record in my family. That's why I never got left alone with him. Unfortunately my cousins did. The expected happened. And then the unexpected. After 40 some years he finally got reported and is now rotting in a county jail. My sister and I both got UTIs at the same time when our family was staying at our grandparents' house. One day my grandma took both of us aside and started what felt like an interrogation about whether any adults had touched us. Like, if something happened, you have to tell me right now. At the time, I felt gross, confused, and guilty, even though nothing had happened. It was just too intense. I later learned that my grandma had been sexually abused by her brother for years and her mother refused to believe her. When I was around 6 to 8 years old, my uncle passed away. I thought it was something sudden and medically tragic, as I remember him having lung problems of some sort. When I got older I found out he committed suicide because his girlfriend broke up with him. I remember visiting my dad and hanging out in my uncle's room where we got to play video games and listen to cool music with him. That was the start of me learning about mental illness running in the family and connected a lot of dots for me. Was told my aunt and uncle died because of a carbon monoxide leak in their house. When I was 16 I was told the truth. My uncle was having serious money problems. He shot my aunt and then hung himself. That my grandmother's husband was a pedophile. All of a sudden I knew why my uncle was so weird and would pick me up and carry me away rather than let me stay alone in a room with him. For the longest time I thought my uncle was a real prude. My male cousins could all swim naked or run around in just their swim trunks, but my uncle made me always wear a swimsuit and put on a cover-up when I came out of the pool. He later admitted, if God forbid he touched you, I was making sure no one could try to blame you. They blamed all his other victims for being too tempting. My uncle, bless his heart, wanted to kill that man so bad. For that matter so did my dad. Finding out the pedo was, well, a pedo, made all of their muttering to each other at family gatherings make so much more sense. Closed bracket. One of my most beloved mom's recipes was actually hamburger helper. She was a from scratch cook and literally everything else we ate she made herself. She never told us because it made her so mad that her kids would love a boxed meal so much. She did it once out of sheer desperation because she didn't have time to cook one night. We ended up loving it. I only found out in college because I begged for the recipe. I love giving her crap for it to this day. My dad never called his stepmom anything but her real name, Margaret. He has 7 brothers and sisters and they all called her mom or some form of that. When I got older it turns out my grandpa was actually cheating on my real grandma, my dad's mom, with Margaret while she was dying for colon cancer. My dad was 5 when she dies, and as she was dying my dad had to call my grandpa to tell him to come home because she was dying. After that Margaret and her 3 kids moved in, and my dad was forced to live with his sister who was 18 and married. This was late 70s backcountry, so not abnormal for the time. From then until he turned 16, when he decided to move in with his best friend and his mom. So I learned that he probably has always had resentment towards Margaret because of everything that happened when he was so young, and never wanted to call her anything that resembled a mother because that's not what she was to him. That my aunt's close friend that she lives with is actually her girlfriend was about 22 when they told me. Never even thought about it until it was said. Weird how I was completely oblivious to this for so many years. Not all that extreme, but it was emotional for me. My grandfather was the typical tough, rugged mountain man. He never expressed emotion, and in fact rarely ever even spoke at family gatherings. He would just sit in the corner drinking beer. I never felt that he and I had a very good relationship, considering I was the weird artsy kid in the family. We didn't have much to talk about because we couldn't relate to each other well. He died of lung cancer 2 years ago. A couple of months after he died, I was visiting my parents and my mom pulled out a showbox that belonged to him filled with sentimental photographs that he kept hidden in his closet. Nobody knew about it until after he died, and they were cleaning his things out. Almost every single photograph was of me. It broke my heart. I wish I would have been closer to him. He clearly loved me a lot more than I thought he did. My late father was a great dad, went to work, came home every night and nothing was really out of the ordinary, except that he would ask my sisters and I to let him use the money from our piggy banks. My granddad lived with us, and he had a great pension and relatively no bills, so he spoiled us rotten, and would always give us money, because he knew we had it, but told us not to tell anyone, and that he'd give it back. He would also really only have 2 moods, really cranky or extremely sweet. My sisters and I called it his nice face. This was all we knew until I was about in 8th grade. We went to a private school and my dad would tell us school was cancelled. There was a gas leak, institute etc. and we would stay home. When we would go back to school, nobody else would know what we meant as they had been in school. One day, just before my graduation, my mom let out a scream and started screaming. Our house was being foreclosed on and my dad hadn't been paying the mortgage and had been trying to cover up for the fact that he had been a functional cocaine addict. The nice face was when he was high. The school absences were because he'd spent tuition money on drugs and then had to pay before my mom caught wind. Apparently, it had gotten worse by this time, but he'd been an addict for more than 20 years and none of us knew. My grandma and grandpa have been separated since we were all young kids. My grandpa would always fall asleep on the couch before we went to bed on holidays, and when we'd wake up in the morning, he was out getting coffee. We never thought anything of it because they were still always together. However, looking back, I don't remember them ever being in the same room or ever really interacting beyond the age of about 5. They're very Catholic and don't believe in divorce, yet they both have new significant others who are pushing them for marriage. Holidays are very weird now. My pet rabbit got attacked by something a couple years after I got it. My parents found it dead and replaced it before I found out. I just thought my rabbit lived super long, but it was actually 2 rabbits. This happened over 10 years ago, and I found out last year. My parents were swingers. My best friend growing up would come stay the night at my house on occasion because her parents were going to have a sleepover with their friends, and their friends were always another couple. 10-year-old me thought nothing of it, didn't realize till I was an adult what her parents were actually probably doing. I wonder if she ever figured it out. Dad and his brother hate each other. His dad, my grandfather, was dying. He needed a kidney. Dad was a match and didn't donate. Once he has cheat kicked off for real. I always thought it was due to my dad not giving the kidney. My dad drinks a lot. It would affect him greatly to give up a kidney. There were many accusations about his drinking and being selfish. After the funeral we were asked to come take a lot of his belongings and his brother showed up and made a big scene. I broke it up and went to talk to my uncle. I was like WTF and didn't make progress. Keep in mind that I'm like 30 plus in the middle of this. Last year it all became 100% clear. My uncle likes to play the victim, but was piece of shit trying to cover his ass. My uncle has been married 6 times. He lied to his wife about how many marriages he had. He is a serial cheater. During the numerous hospital stays of my grandfather, my uncle would travel to be with his dad. but in reality he was out fucking everything that moved, namely a nurse looking after my grandfather. At this time he is married to wife 6, she thinks she is 3rd, and has his first child who is about 10. Uncle had always been this guy, but it blew up when my dad was hanging out with his bro and his brother's business partner. Dad got drunk and laid all his brother's dirty laundry out to the business partner. All of it, every detail. The business partner jokingly made comments about it in proximity of the current wife. This obviously caused tension. Tension that eventually had the partners separate. Uncle went nuclear on dad about it. Dad told him 1, if he was that upset about it, why does he keep doing it, and 2, back the FCK off, unless he wants him to lay all his shit out to the current wife. So all this time, all this hate due to uncle trying to keep his secret and masking it as my dad being a piece of shit alcoholic or wanting to stop drinking and save his dad's life. That my grandparents didn't talk to each other 20 years before my grandfather finally kicked the bucket. They lived in the same house the entire time too, and no one knows why they weren't on speaking terms. My mom was in the hospital, so I flew home. Me and my dad were hanging out getting drunk, and he started telling me family secrets, almost like he was trying to get a reaction out of me. An uncle was molested, an estranged aunt might actually have a different father than we thought, etc. The one that really got me was when he revealed that he used to do coke. I was imagining he meant like in his 20s. I said, when did you stop? And he said, I think you were about 19. Like fucking what, man? My entire childhood? And he said, yup. Did mom know? Yes. How much? About a gram a week. At first it was completely insane to me, but looking back it made a ton of stuff make way more sense. Crazy mood swings, explosive fights. 1 minute he would be fine, and then suddenly he would be raving about something. I knew he drank, so I always blamed the instability in the house on that. But finding out he was regularly doing coke all my life was both astounding, and it made complete sense. I didn't know one of my cousins existed until I was about 10 years old. Turns out he was diagnosed with leukemia as a child, and I was a very sensitive kid, so my family decided not to tell me until the treatment was successful and he recovered. It would have been okay if they told me as soon as he was healthy again, but I guess they forgot. So the first time I met him, I was wondering how exactly I managed to forget the existence of a whole person. That my dad was a pedophile. Had no clue. Even through a decade of abuse, I was told to keep the secret by him, and my family kept the secret from me because they had thoughts of him being better or reformed. So, when I was 15 I realized it was wrong. Or, it all started to make sense. Who knew? As a child, you can't trust your own father. From my father's family line, my great-grandfather killed my great-grandmother with an axe while she was sleeping. My grandma, who was the oldest one, raised all of her siblings. She was 19 at the time and just married my granddad, who was 19 too. Youngest sister was just 2 years old. They were 9 in total. I knew my grandma raised all her siblings, but I always thought it was because her mother died from some illness. I just found out when I was 17 and asked my aunt. Edit. Wow. This really blew up. Thanks for the upvotes and the kind words. Grandma is a real hero indeed. She always tells stories of how she managed to feed so many people. They were really poor back in those ages. First of all, mandatory. English is not my first language. Sorry for any grammar mistake. It's crazy and sad at the same time. How many people have similar stories? I'll try to answer some questions. But why did he kill her? Did he go to prison? He was an alcoholic, came home drunk one night, and had the idea that she was cheating on him. She wasn't. Actually, he was the one who was having an affair and even had a kid with another woman. I never met them. He went to prison, got cancer and died. Nobody wanted to claim the corpse and give him a funeral. Sorry if this is intrusive or offensive in any way, but schizophrenia or some related mental illness wasn't the reason for the murder, was it? I suspect he had some mental illness, but he was never diagnosed. This was in the 50s, and we are from Uruguay. Mental illness was a taboo back in those days. So did your grandparents end up having biological children as well? Yes, my father was born 10 years after that, and my aunt, the one who told me the story, was born 25 years after that. My aunt and uncle, who passed away when I was 11, were drug addicts. I adored them, but as I got older I started seeing less and less of them and never understood why. My parents briefly told me when I was 16 and that my uncle didn't die of a brain tumor, actually had one though, but instead he shot himself while my aunt was in the other room, which led to my aunt's drug-related death on New Year's Day. They finally told me the whole story when I was 21. I was the last person to know. Even my little brother knew before me because I was extremely close to them and looked so highly of them. I still do. I wish I would have known sooner, but I understand why they didn't tell me. My grandmother was a hard drug addict. She was a nurse and basically Nurse Jackied her way into stealing dilaudid hydromorphone from the hospital and shooting it up for a decade or so. I still don't know the real specifics, but this was happening when I was roughly 1 to 10 years old, and I was told about it when I was in my mid-20s. She was never noticeably out of it, but I remember her being super chill every time she watched us and rarely ever drove us anywhere. Now I understand that she was just stoned sideways and wasn't going to risk driving us kids around while she was under the influence. Another odd thing, when she was stoned she would always eat ice chips. She's sober now and doesn't anymore, but I remember her chomping on ice cubes all day long when we were little. Edit, I just spoke to my mother to make sure my facts were straight. A few things to add. I was younger than 10 when this all went down, changed my age above to 1 to 10 years old. She was not shooting narcotics for years. She was abusing pain pills, Demerol, for years. 1 to 6 months after she switched to injecting dilaudid/Demerol, she was noticed at the hospital and drug tested on the spot. Her license was revoked, but she went through the rehabilitation programs and got her license back and continued working as a nurse until she retired. Mom said that she had always chomped ice because she is anemic and because of pica, though plenty of people have suggested that opiates and ice chomping run hand in hand. Mom tells me that grandma isn't the same woman she once was. She used to have a confidence about her like aura that followed her into every room. She demanded respect and fought hard for the things she believed in. Her strong will is no longer a part of her, almost as if the shame and ridicule of her character has snuffed out the flame she once had. I always have and always will love her unconditionally. She is our matriarch.